We're now going to tackle the ideas within the mark section of the book. As a starting point, watching the video or with colleagues in your school, going back to the workload challenge report, 32% of teachers who responded said modify marking requirements as a possible solution. So 5 years ago in my school, we looked at John Hattie's research. Now John is one of the most cited academics, education researchers around the world at this present time. In here you'll see effect sizes. Here's a small sample. At the time of speaking on this video there are 252, but here's a small sample. At the very top you'll see feedback is highlighted as 0.73 impact on student outcomes. Now to give some context, 0.4 is the equivalent of half a grade in an academic year, so 0.8 would be a whole grade of progress. So feedback when teachers mark books, or what I would say when teachers are explicit in their verbal feedback to students, they could have a huge impact on student outcomes. But when I go back to our original footage at the beginning of this video, context, what works? When you dig into the details, it says 0.32 for drugs. So ask yourself here, what type of drugs? If I take aspirins or if I just shoot up in class, as a teacher, as a student, my kids are going to get better results. But when you dig into the details, you'll realise that it's Ritalin for students with ADHD. So here it's important to tackle what the headlines say and just don't take it as verbatim. As an activity for watching this video, a starting point that we did as a school was we looked at marking on its own. And on the left, before the Ofsted and Department for Education's guidance poster was published, we produced a set of what we wanted our teachers to do, and on the right, what we didn't want to do. And then over about 6 to 8 week period, we came back to this document, we revisited the material, and we actually condensed it even further. And looking on there on the right hand side, you'll see some silly things such as don't mark in that pen or mark in this colour, or don't leave mark in an assessment for a certain period of time. Those things aren't conducive to what I'm advocating here in Mark Plan Teach. It goes back to that one sentence, allow teachers to feedback regular and diagnostic when it meets the needs of children. So pause the video and look at this slide and ask yourself, what could you do in the room when you're watching this video? Do you have a document that advocates what you currently do and what you shouldn't do? Because it's a good starting point to address the marking burden. It's a great activity for your staff, for your leadership teams, or for even your department. So we're now going to look at the first idea within the mark section of the book. How can teachers have a secure overview of their children? And this includes their social, emotional, mental health, as well as their performance. On the screen here, you've got a seating plan. Now this seating plan is shared by ASCL, so Association School College Leaders, about 5, 6 or so years ago. And it was shared as good practice. What I would like you to do is just pause the video for a moment, look at the information on the screen and ask yourself, is this something that you would routinely do as a classroom teacher? Also ask yourself, for what purpose does this seating plan serve? Is it for the benefit of the students, for the teacher, or for an observer who visits your classroom? So let's just look at this image from two perspectives. As a classroom teacher, is this something that you could routinely produce? Does it give you a clear snapshot of your children and where they are? Or as an observer, if I visit your classroom and I'm presented with this photographic seating plan, it could be quite helpful for me to access student information very quickly. So the first activity, in your download pack, you've got this data in front of you. Now this data is from 2017-18, in the period where grades were moving from A to G to 9 to 1 scores. It's a year 10 class, okay, so they're 14 years old. There's also just 14 students in there. Now what I want you to do, you're teaching this class on Monday. They're a very naughty class. Student L is very challenging. And what I'd like you to ask yourself is, what's your methodology? Do you have a seating plan? Are you going to plan in a particular way? So how are you going to use this information to plan your lesson when you first meet this class on that Monday morning? Okay, so we have the data here in front of us. So let me just give you a bit of help. There's 14 students here. You've got male and female. There's just 3 girls. You've got pupil premium, so that's students that come from disadvantaged backgrounds. You've got their ethnicity codes. You've also got their SEN status. So you've got lots of abbreviations at the bottom. What I would just like to highlight to you is the column that says EAL stage. So remember that students that are at code A are new to English, so their family speak a different language at home, or it's their home language. And as they are immersed in the curriculum and can access material, an abbreviation or a letter E would mean that they're fluent in English and their home language. Then you have the reading age. So this data, let me give you more context. It's taken from April, so the second third of the year. This reading age is captured in the September at the start of the academic year in England. So the reading age, you could argue that it's perhaps 6 months out of date. So even looking at student L, who's got a reading age of 8, remember this student's 14 years old, maybe they are now a reading age of 9 or something. So the data's not helpful to a point here because it's out of date. You've then got the two students at the bottom, talented subjects. So student L, again, is talented in art, and student M is talented in PE. The next column, HML, stands for high, middle, low attainers, and this data is derived from their performances at primary school. Okay, so take that into context, and then following the columns, let's just ignore key groups because that's the focus groups for the school based on past examination year group performances. You've then got all the numbers in the right-hand columns, okay, in the yellow area where you've got all teacher assessments and predictions. The final thing I want you to consider before you tackle this information is on the right-hand side, you've then got teacher assessments that are colour-coded and also fine-graded. Assessment point 1, so the third column from the right-hand side, is captured in October, the next column along January, and then the third column on the far right-hand side is from about the March or April window of the academic year. So I would like to know from you, look at this data, pause the video and tell me, what are you going to do to meet the needs of these children? So in the download materials, there's just this simple template of a seating plan in the classroom. Either create your own to match your own classroom, or just use this simple template to allocate where you would sit your students if you wanted to have a seating plan. So let's just take a look at some of the answers you might have come up with. The first thing to point out here is that these 14 students come from 75 different primary schools. So this one school takes children from 75 different primary schools. So you could argue that that's 75 schools, different versions of what a level 5 is, or what a grade A looks like, or a 100 reading score, or whatever it would be. These students are in a design technology classroom, and in Key Stage 3, so 11 to 14 years old, they rotate around 4 teachers every academic year. And over 3 years, in 7, 8 and 9, they potentially might see 12 different design technology teachers. So again, that's 12 teachers, different versions of what a level 5 might look like, or a grade A, or a 9 score, or whatever it would be. The last thing to look at is on the right hand side of the screen, you'll notice the colour coding and the fine grading. You might also notice carefully that some students are actually regressing, their grades are getting worse. One thing to consider here is 75 schools feeding into the student data, then 12 teacher assessments. It might be at this point when this one teacher has 14 children that have chosen to study their subject with specific domain knowledge. Maybe it's finally here where the teacher can accurately assess where the students are on the course, and it actually starts to challenge prior predictions that might be broader or totally off the mark. So some of the responses I'm looking for here will vary significantly. You might teach year 1, you might teach year 11, you might be a maths teacher or a PE teacher. The key answer here is you've got to know your students, and how you do this is what suits you in your classroom. If I'm a maths teacher and I see my kids all year, maybe over a period of time I'll let students choose their own seats. But when we look carefully at this slide, so on page 9 of Mark Plan Teach, you'll see that the data is helpful to a degree, but then you might want to get to know your students very quickly, and this will be done through quick questioning, spelling tests. Ross might walk into the classroom late. He might give you a bit of a surly look, he might be a bit difficult, he might call out, and as you get to know your children, you'll start to adapt your teaching methods. true assessment for learning is when teachers adapt to meet their needs of the students. And if we look at the teacher standards, that's what it says. This is not assessment for learning when it's become colour-coded red, amber, green cells where we're tracking student information to a point where it's not sustainable for teacher workload. So you have the data, you've quizzed your kids, you get to know them a little bit more, but you do much more behind the scenes. So you'll start to know where students are, you triangulate information. You might talk to Ross outside the classroom, you'll go and see what he's like on the sports pitch. You might talk to mum and dad the night before or next week, or see how he behaves in his form class or with Mr. McGill in his maths lesson. That's where a teacher starts to differentiate and meet the needs of a child over a period of time. And I'd argue that you cannot see differentiation in a one-off lesson performance. This is where the teacher starts to gather data throughout an academic year to truly understand and meet the needs of one child. Okay, so the next idea is the Pygmalion effect. Now, it's research from 1965. So context is key here. It could be out of date, but what I want us to do is just consider it for a moment. So let's refer back to the data I gave you in the previous idea. 14 children, quite a tough class. I might have said student L was a bit naughty. What I was doing there was influencing your bias, and that might have affected how you planned the lesson. So let's just look at this research. So Dr. Robert Rosenthal, Harvard University, 1965. Here we have in this circle a self-fulfilling prophecy where you believe, so if I give you this data, you believe that these students are of a certain ability. It then shapes your actions, your planning, how you tackle Ross's behaviour in the lesson. And then it also affirms what I believe about my capability in the lesson. This then leads to me acting on my results in lesson over time. So if I'm in set 4 for maths and I can only get a grade D, I might come with a kind of lazy attitude because that's all I think that I'm capable of, and that's reinforced by my teacher. This then comes back to the teacher. Well, if I then behave in that way, then the teacher kind of says, well, I told you so. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what I would like you to do, and we'll talk about this after, there's a video here that I'd like you to watch from 1965. It's also known as the Golem effect. Primary classroom in America, primary teachers, 2 classrooms. So to find this video, you can access it on YouTube, Pygmalion effect, Dr. Robert Rosenthal, and you'll be able to find various links. Watch the video and then we'll discuss the findings. So in a summary, the Pygmalion effect. This is what the research shows. So again, 1965, the academics involved in research and the head teacher told the primary teachers, this class is A, this class is B, so top set or bottom set. If I teach the top set and I believe they're the top set, then I'm going to be nicer to those children. This is called the climate effect. If I teach them more material, the input effect, I'm going to ask them more questions, challenge them a little bit more. I'm going to give them more time to answer. So if I think Ross is a smart kid, I'll give him more time. I might tease out responses, prompt, ask for a bit more clarity. And then I'll also not accept a low quality response. And in the video you'll hear, well, if I think Ross is done, what's the point of me giving detailed feedback? So in summary, pause the video and discuss in your groups, have you suffered from the Pygmalion effect, and have you ever experienced it in your career or when you were a child yourself? Okay, idea number 2 in the mark section. So I call this zonal marking. Some of you might have heard the term yellow box. And I'm also going to kind of cite Carol Dweck's research here in growth mindset about using the phrase not yet. So I want you to just look at this image and just listen to this story shared by head teacher Jeremy Hannay. Here's a hockey team, it's half time, the coach is gathered around the goalmouth, it's the cup final and they're losing 1-0. The kids are drinking the water, they're having their oranges, and the coach starts to write notes on a piece of paper in terms of Ross goes down the right wing, etc., pass the ball. By the time the coach has finished writing their notes, the referee blows the whistle and the children have to go back out onto the pitch to play the second half. As you'd imagine, the children haven't been given any feedback, any tactics, and they go on to lose the game. And then the captain of the team comes back into the changing rooms, the coach is not there, and there's a scrumpled ball of paper on the floor, and The captain opens the notes and sees all the feedback that the students would have needed in the hockey team to be able to win the match. The point here is that the feedback was too late, and this is largely what we do in our classrooms. We mark children's books 2 or 3 weeks after the lesson, and as we know children, they'll have forgotten what was happening, or when the feedback was most required, it's become ineffective 2 or 3 weeks later. So how we give feedback is quite important. So why do we assume that written feedback is the best form? So in my research that I'm conducting at present, we're looking at how when teachers speak to children, it can have the same, if not better, and more immediate impact on children's progress rather than when we write in books 2 or 3 weeks later. On the screen you'll see the summary from the Department for Education's Workload Marking Review group. So again, this was an outcome of the workload challenge research that started 4 or 5 years ago. There are 3 fantastic words in here that you need to consider when you're tackling marking, assessment and feedback. If it's not manageable, then you need to abandon it. But if it is, and it's something that you can do all the time, and again, I'm not going to put a number on this, but if it's manageable for you as a teacher, then it's probably worth continuing with. 2 other ones, if I give Ross some feedback that motivates him and it's going to mean something to him to improve his performance, then it's probably an effective technique. So any marking strategies that you use in your school, if they're not manageable for the teacher, they're not meaningful or motivate the child to actually do the work itself, then it's probably not a good idea. So here, this will take us on to another idea, which is zonal marking. So here's an activity. Here's the yellow box shared by George Spencer Academy in Nottinghamshire many, many years ago, and I discovered it about 5 years ago, and I think it's a fabulous tool. I wouldn't call it yellow box anymore. I look at it as a zonal marking technique. Now it's important to stress here that this is not an every lesson technique to use, it's as and when needed. So the principle is this. On your slide or on your download materials, you'll see examples of 3 essays. What I would like you to do is choose one assignment, and I'm going to give you just 4 minutes maximum. So I'm going to time yourself and then the video is going to pause and come back. I would like you in that 4 minutes to skim read. Then I would like you to just choose one paragraph, highlight that paragraph and mark it, and then diagnose something that you want the student to actually do. Now the bottom right of this screen you can see there's a yellow box. Now the box might limit what the students can do, so you might want to leave it open, but at least the left and right hand lines indicate how much work you want back from the child. Now I'm not going to share the problems or the great successes with this idea until you've tried it. But on this slide as your guide, you've got 4 minutes, 1 minute to skim read, and after that 1 minute where you then highlight the marking area, mark the work, then diagnose and draw the empty box where you want the students to tackle your feedback. Context is key. You don't know the students here, but you might want to trial it with your own children's work because you'll understand their needs, you'll understand what they're capable of, rather than using my examples. So now you've had a go at the idea, let me just share some of the responses and feedback that I've received from teachers across the UK. The first one is, if we look at Bryce's example, the example I'm now showing you on the screen, you can see in the second paragraph that I've circled the word there, which Bryce has spelt incorrectly. As a teacher, I want Bryce to spell this word there in this context and get it right forever. I don't want him to make the mistake ever again, and I also want him to be able to spell the word there in all his other subjects. The second point here, Bryce is also a high attaining student. I know this child, I know what he's capable of. His handwriting's atrocious, but if we just look at the statement here, he talks about money and why it matters. But as a high attaining student, he hasn't explained why he said that. So as a redraft exercise, when I give him this feedback, 1, I want him to fix the word spelling and get the word there spelt correctly, and 2, I want him to redraft the whole paragraph and explain why he makes such a bold statement. Because this feedback is specific, I can ask Bryce to do this next lesson or in the lesson or as a homework exercise, whether or not he has parental support at home. Another suggestion to be wary of, if you look at Zareen's assignment, you can clearly see that she's spent a lot of time producing a 2-page assignment. Now, she might have done this at home with her family as a homework exercise. And if I then mark one paragraph and either family or Zareen doesn't understand why only one paragraph has been marked, there is a danger that I need to then manage her motivation, her self-esteem, and be careful of what feedback I provide her if she doesn't understand the reason why it's being used. So in the context of using the idea, the yellow box or zonal marking, explain the idea to students. When you know Zareen or Bryce and you know what they're capable of, they'll understand why you're only marking one paragraph, because you're either tackling a literacy issue or you want to tackle some subject knowledge. So yellow box is a concept for teachers to mark, not every lesson, but something that's regular. It might be lesson 1, lesson 7, redraft, and then lesson 12, and then let's do a final assignment such as Zareen's, and then we mark the whole piece of work and give the student a grade. Some of the pitfalls, triple marking as we know. I mark the work, Bryce responds to the work, then what do I do with it? Do I just nod my head? Do I tick it? We've now got in our profession where we have this triple marking response, and times 30 students, you can suddenly see why marking becomes something that's not possible to achieve every time we set a piece of work. So I'm not sure if you've heard of Jim Smith, the lazy teacher. He's written this fabulous book about teaching and learning ideas and how teachers can do less and get their students to work harder. Jim talks about triple marking, and he talked about this idea almost a decade ago, and it's been lost in translation. So context is key. Jim's clarification on this is that the student checks the work. I mean, as a teacher, I might say, Ross, I'm not accepting that piece of work. It's not good enough. Go and do it again before I even waste my time marking that work. It's a good strategy you might want to consider. But then I would mark the work, and then the student acts on quick wins. If we're then in a position where I've got to mark it or tick it again, then we're getting into a triple marking frenzy, and then the idea is counterproductive. One way that this then goes even further is then I then stamp your book, I give the student some feedback, and then I ask the student to write down what I've said to them in class. Again, this is a byproduct perhaps of a broken system, or for monitoring, or for compliance. So again, let's just look at the 3 words from the Department for Education. If I ask a student to write down what I've said, is this meaningful? Is it manageable for the student to do? Is it manageable for me? Could I run around the classroom and stamp everyone's books? Well, perhaps I could. Is it going to motivate the child to actually do the work? So, sir, you've just spoken to me again. Why do I need to write down what you've said before I actually do the work itself? Show me the research where adding a verbal feedback stamp improves learning or classroom practice. I'm yet to discover what effective marking looks like in 25 years, never mind silly ideas such as this. But this is where context and research is important. My son is in year 3, he's 7 years old. If this stamp was suddenly a smiley face, and he's doing his spelling test every Friday in school, if the teacher stamps his work and then speaks to my son and then asks him to improve his spelling, not only is that manageable for the teacher, but it's going to motivate my son to perform better at his spelling test, and he gets to sit on the golden gala table for lunch on a Friday. So let's just do the maths, because I don't think anyone at the Department for Education has done the calculations, or if you're a school leader watching this video, if you have a marking strategy that you want all your teachers to do, what does it look like for the teacher who teaches the most classes? So again, primary school, 30 kids, you might be teaching 5 or 6 different subjects. If you're a secondary school teacher, you might teach drama. You might have 15 or 19 classes. So if we look at the yellow box again, if we just say it took 4 minutes to do, let's just work out. Once a week, I then want you to use the yellow box. Okay, 30 students, 6 times a term, so a half term here. It's 180 marking episodes. I then say over the year, that's 1,080 times, 4 minutes each, you're going to mark a piece of work. So let's do the maths. I'll be generous, I'll give you 5 minutes. That's 5,500 minutes. Divide that by an hour, that's 90 hours a year. Divide that by 24 hours a day, that's 3 3/4 days of non-stop marking. Now, I've never met a teacher who works 24 hours a day, although some of them try to, but no one works 24 hours a day. So you could probably double that number to 7 or 8 days. So if you're using this one idea, which I think is very effective and can be used in not regular, I don't mean every lesson, but as and when, and it just takes 4 minutes. If a school then asks your teacher to do certain things all the time every week for every child, then you can see such a great idea can become ineffective. And if we work all out, this is just one class, you teach 10 classes or 10 different subjects as a primary teacher, you can see that this is not a possible ask for any teacher. So let's look at another idea on marking. On the screen you've got a template here that I'd like you to access from the downloadable materials. Here's an image to prompt you. I'm going to give you just 3 minutes, so I'd like you to pause the video, set a timer, and these are the instructions. I would like you to simply draw a novelty USB design in 3 minutes. Off you go. I've been so busy with all my marking and reports, I forgot to tell you that this was a test. So if you're in a group watching this video, swap papers, add your name, swap papers. If you're watching this on your own, then you're going to mark your own test. I'm really sorry I didn't give you the mark scheme beforehand, but here you go. So here's the success criteria. On the screen, you'll see all the different points and all the different features. So I'll explain the top 2 and I'll leave you time to mark the work. A front view, so here's my remote control, that's a front view, and there's a side view. So the front view you can have 2 points and a side view 5 points. Mark the rest of your drawing and let me know how you got on. So you've got all the different grades, add up your marks. I've just remembered I forgot to give you the grade boundaries as well. So there they are. So how did you do? The chances are you didn't do very well the first time around. Research suggests that when teachers regularly test their children, so low stake testing, there's a chance that they perform better and the information is stored in their long-term memory. Therefore, in the classroom, this can be regular quizzing. So in this case, I'm going to give you a second chance. Only this time, for the sake of the video, I'm going to share the success criteria with you. You can start to redraw another idea and see how you perform this time. So on the screen, you'll see the success criteria. What I would like you to do is to pause the video and look at the criteria for 30 seconds and also start a brand new second drawing. After 30 seconds, hide the success criteria from the screen and use the remaining 2.5 minutes to complete your novelty drawing idea. So here we go. On the screen, you've got the success criteria. Pause the video for 30 seconds. Now 30 seconds have gone. Spend the remaining time to draw your novelty USB and let's see how you do. So you finish your drawing. What I would like you to do is swap papers. And before we mark the work, I just want to emphasize several points. The first point is this. It's amazing what you can get adults to do. So think about when we ask children to do the same kind of things, what emotions they are going through. You know, learning is emotional, and if you've had an emotional response to being asked to do a drawing, imagine what it feels like for an 11-year-old. The second point is, don't take this too seriously if you get a bad score the second time around. What I'm trying to advocate here is that when teachers don't share the success criteria, there's a likelihood that students will perform worse. So here you go. Could you spend a moment, couple of minutes, to mark each other's work, or if you're on your own, mark your own, and then at the end, I'll share the grade boundaries with you again. So final chance on the grade boundaries, and here we go. So how did you do? So there's a likelihood that you've performed a bit better. And the reason behind that is I've shared the success criteria with you and I've given you a chance to redraft your work in the curriculum. Now, key question here, if I was in the room with you, what would be the difference? Now, what would typically happen is that I've then educated my students in terms of how to use my methodology and how to mark the work themselves, so a bit of self or peer assessment. And what you'll find is if you try this technique with your students and you scaffold the work, you'll find that you actually are doing less work in the classroom and the students are actually starting to self-regulate. And it's a great tip for teacher workload. So look at these questions on the screen, pause the video, discuss them in your setting or if you're on your own. What would make the difference here and how could you use this approach in your classroom? So let's look at live marking, section 1, chapter 3. Live marking research shows these things. So I'm going to just focus on the ones in red on the screen. That's corrections, creating a dialogue in your classroom, and fixing the work quickly so that you can target 4 or 5 students, maybe even 30, so that you don't take the work home. And this is a great technique for day-to-day marking. Now, live marking in its traditional sense is I take my red pen, I get off my classroom table, and I go around the classroom and I mark the students' work while they're in the lesson. That's not possible to do with 30 students every lesson, but I might want to target 4 or 5 children every lesson. Another way of doing it is using this nice little device called a visualizer. Now, they're much more affordable, but what I'm going to tackle here are 3 things that you can see on the screen in red: corrections, creating the dialogue, and then frequency and speed. So live marking, either pen, move around the classroom, or use the visualizer to manage behaviour, transitions, and demonstrate work from the front of the classroom. So here I am at the front of my classroom modelling how live marking might work in my classroom. So I've got another activity for you here. Now, if I was with you, I would ask people in the room to put their hand up and say if you think learning's emotional. Now, you always get a mixed response. Some people are a bit reluctant, but generally the consensus is over a period of time, particularly if I'm doing these ideas with you all day, is that teachers will say, of course, learning's emotional. Now, in the classroom world, when teachers model ideas, it has a more effective impact on student outcomes. So primary teachers are brilliant at modelling. Secondary teachers, we tend to less spoon feed, but it's important that we still model what we want students to do. So here's a simple methodology. I'm going to do this exercise first. We're then going to do it together, and then you're going to do it by yourself. Now, I'm not in the room with you, but I'm going to model a technique using the I do, we do, you do model. I'm going to do an exercise first, then you're going to do it together with me during the video. So we're going to do this live, we're not going to pause the video, and then you're going to do it by yourself. So here we go. So I want you to just look at the screen and watch me annotate a drawing. So I'm just going to pop to my visualizer. So here it is on the screen. Here you can see my pen. Let's just get that in focus for you. So this is a year 7 lesson. I could probably squeeze this into the year 5 curriculum, so with 8 or 9-year-olds. So stage 1, I'm going to just sketch a clock face and just mark out 12, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6, 8 and 10. And I'm just going to draw in the guidelines between those points so that I've got the angles or the principles to be able to draw this 3D cube. So stage 1, 8 to 2 o'clock, I need to draw 3 lines that are parallel and equally spaced and follow the 8 to 2 o'clock angle. Stage 2, 10 to 4 o'clock, I'm going to go over the top, equally spaced, mark out 10 and 4. I've then got 4 diamonds in the middle, and I need to follow the 12 to 6 o'clock line and get the vertical line intersect through the diamond. So there's the first one. Oops. 12, 6 o'clock. There's the right hand side here. So I will draw the next line, the left, there. Now the difficulty is to find where the cube is. So we're drawing a 3D cube, something that looks like this. So if I just draw a little sketch to give you a bit of help, that's what we're trying to draw. So here we can mark out the top of the cube or the cardboard box. The vertical line is here along the main guideline. There's the back right, there's the back left, there's the bottom left, and there's the bottom right. So now you've drawn the first cube, what I would like you to do in the room, now I know I'm not there, but could I ask you now to draw a small and a very large cube? So to do that, you need to bring the lines closer together to draw a small cube and make the lines wider apart to draw a bigger cube. So if I draw the small one over here, we need to bring the lines closer together. So there's my 8 to 2 o'clock. Again, it's a little bit wonky, doesn't matter. 10 to 4 o'clock, 3 lines close together, and my 12 to 6. You'll see here, there's the cube, there's the top, there's the front, there's the back left, back right, bottom left. To draw the large one, lines wider apart. So here we go, 8 to 2 o'clock, 10 to 4, 12 to 6, and then I sketch in the top, the front, the back left, the back right, bottom left. So small, medium and large. So if you've got that far, well done. So now we've done the exercise and I've used, let's say, one of your examples in the room. I might have brought your work to the front, put it under the visualizer, or if not, I might have walked around the classroom with a red pen and marked your work. Over time, if this is a habit, then these things start to happen. So the visualizer on my desk, someone at the front, I might do these things. I might not let anybody ask any questions. I won't offer any help. I then ensure that students are listening to my instructions for the first time. I won't accept anyone saying I can't do this because that's an emotional response. I'm going to support children to be able to achieve this. So the same thing for you watching this video. I want you to do the following exercise. Finally, I might model the work in silence. Now, we all work with different students, different challenges. You need to work out if this is something that you can do as a routine over a period of time. And what tends to happen is, one, not only can you tackle marking in the lesson, but gradually Ross, who might be a difficult student, who might not want his work on show in front of his peers, over time might be desperate to show his work in front of others just because he gets to play with it under the screen. So something to consider. Finally, ask yourself these 3 questions from the Department for Education Workload Mark and Review. Is using the visualizer or a red pen walking around the classroom manageable for me as a teacher, particularly if I target 4 or 5 students each lesson? If I give specific feedback to a child that's immediate, if we think about Michal Csikszentmihalyi flow model, where we move students from apathy to flow, they're immersed in their learning because they get immediate feedback, then this is going to be more meaningful and motivating for them to actually want to fix this there and then in the classroom. So it's a good check. When you live mark in the classroom, mark 1 or 2 students around the room or use the tools such as the visualizer. Now, some of you might have seen this video before, but if you haven't, go to YouTube and type in Austin's butterfly and just spend 5 minutes watching this video. If you've already seen the video, a question from me is, have you showed this video to your students? Because I have, and what it shows with year 7s or for students in 6th form is that they suddenly realise that they can improve their first draft. The challenge we have as teachers is often we don't have 6 or 7 opportunities to redraft the same piece of work. In this particular video, the feedback given is when Austin, the student, is asked to redraft their first drawing of a butterfly to their 6th version, they're looking at their drawing from the eyes of a scientist, where the critique and feedback given is specific and motivates them to actually improve. So now we've tried live marking and we've watched Austin's butterfly, how could we also use this in our day-to-day practice? So another technique, anonymous work samples. So some of your teachers in your school, you might be teaching the same scheme of work. You might be in the same year group and you've got students doing the same exercises. A great way to alleviate stress and allow students to start peer and self-assessing is to gather all the work, take their names off it, swap them over or photocopy, and then you'll see that students can suddenly rank the work and critique one another's and start to share and compare ideas. It's surprising how easy they can do this, and it's a nice, low-stakes, non-threatening way to allow students to critique one another's work without fear of retribution. So if you give that idea in your classroom, just to support the idea with some research, on the left-hand side, you'll see a portfolio of photographs with some research I was involved with about 20 years ago with Goldsmiths College and Cambridge University. What this device did was collect student images, voice recordings, notes from a stylus pen on a device, and behind the scenes, on the right-hand side, it built up a portfolio of students' work. What it allowed me to do as a teacher was I then saw the student's final piece of work on a screen, and it was compared against another student. Now this, in today's landscape, is called comparative judgment or comparative assessment, but it's actually been around for about 80 or 90 years. And if we think of what we can do as teachers, we very quickly can make an assessment on the quality of a student's piece of work. And if we can use this technology or this approach, whether it's anonymized or whether it's digitized, we can quickly compare students' work. Where we may find discrepancies, we would pull this one piece of work out, look at it in much more detail and compare the outcomes with the assessment criteria. So live marking, whether it's comparing work under a visualizer or with a red pen, or you compare students' work anonymised or online such as a portfolio, this technology allowed me to compare work very quickly, and then where we had one or two issues, we would look at it in much more detail. It's a great technique to try for department moderation, but also for a routine to embed in your classroom where students are always comparing one another's work. And just to finish off, summarising some bits of research from the mark section of the videos, I've talked about Carol Dweck, not explicitly, but at some points throughout the videos, I've talked about how you can use a not yet vocabulary, particularly with the yellow box or the zonal marking technique. If I ask you to do a drawing and you've not yet annotated or got the angles correctly, that's much more motivating rather than me say, that's a good drawing, but X, Y, Z. We want students to self-regulate, so that peer assessment, that anonymised process might encourage students to start evidencing and self-regulating their own work, not just the behaviour, but the quality of work they do in the classroom. Finally, just remember Rosenthal Pygmalion effect. If I think that you're capable of doing a drawing, I will be nicer to you. If I think you're not very good at drawing, am I going to give you less detailed and explicit feedback? It's just something to be aware of. So if you've got Mark Plan Teach the book, page 16, you'll see a summary of this evidence. Refer the Pygmalion effect, you can find that video on YouTube, and some research I conducted with an organisation called Tougher Minds. And if you don't have access to the book, you can download the synopsis that shares a summary of what's here in this particular slide. So here's a summary from Tim from a psychologist's point of view in terms of feedback. So let's just look at feedback first of all. So you can find all this on page 28 of Mark Plan Teach or in the download materials. So there are several here and I'm not going to go through them all, and you might want to pause the video and discuss them as you watch this video. But if I can just pick out number 4, students need to understand your feedback. They can check the work, but if they don't know how to approach it, then it's going to be ineffective. Number 6, fascinating summary from Tim. It's easier to provide feedback to a child if you're respected. And this, you know, we all work with different children, high achievers, challenging students, etc., etc. How you provide feedback is something to consider, and how it's received. You know, it's got to benefit the receiver more and leave them with more work to do. So it's a fascinating summary. So pause the video, take a look through all the comments, discuss in your groups, or if you're working on your own, consider some of these areas, refer to page 28 or the download materials, and see how you can approach feedback in another way. So here's a summary from Tim again in terms of confidence. So I won't go through all of them. You might want to pause the video and discuss them in your groups, but you can find a summary on page 37 and online download the resource. But if we just look at number 4, for example, I can investigate what barriers my students have and what gaps they are, but I also need to know what gaps to fill in. I might not know all the answers, I might not be able to do them all myself. And there's a chance that you might work with colleagues who can help you fill in those gaps. A key thing here is when I want to boost children's confidence, I have to create an environment where they are happy to be able to know what to do with that information. So fascinating insights. I will never do it justice. I'm not a psychologist, but Tim's summary here is something to just look at in a bit more detail. So pause the video, have a discussion, and let's move on. So here's a summary from Tim in terms of motivation. I won't go through all the points, but you might want to pause the video, discuss them, and look on page 40 on Mark Plan Teach or download the available resources online. A key thing here to just pick up on, number 4, resilience. We want students to be resilient, but they will only learn resilience through failure. So you might want to create a climate in your classroom where students learn from their mistakes, or you embrace mistakes, and so that they develop that confidence. There's fascinating insights here. I won't do it justice as an unqualified, well, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not qualified at all, but Tim is, and he's the expert, and he will explain to you how some of these things might tweak your approaches in the classroom. So now we've looked at all the ideas and you've watched all the videos online, let's just summarise some of the concepts we've discovered. A seating plan. Not everyone needs a seating plan, but it's a great differentiation tool. In my experience teaching design technology, I would see students for 10 or 12 weeks and then they would move on. So having a seating plan was essential so that I started in a commanding position, but more importantly, I got to know my students quicker. Second point, secure overview. It can't just be data alone. We can't just allow data to determine our success in the classroom. I need to also manage my children's social, emotional and mental health needs. And also just picking up on the point about differentiation, that it's over time where I am doing these techniques rather than for a one-off performance that an observer might see. The third point here, referring to Carol Dweck's mindset research, a lovely technique that I've been using for some time is using the word yet or not yet. So rather than you have done this piece of work, but instead replace this with you have done X, Y, Z, you've not yet X, Y, Z. So therefore it's a motivational tool. It's a great little coaching tip. Also, if you replace the word but and use and, it's a good tool to motivate people to actually complete the work. So number 4, yellow box. I use the term zonal marking. We look at a specific area of the work to improve. We're specific, explicit, and we ask the student to focus on one thing rather than everything. This is a great tool to reduce teacher workload and ensure children act on our feedback rather than ignore it. Point number 5, live marking. As I've already modelled, learning's emotional. We have to remember what we ask our children to do. Sometimes they're doing it for the first time, and this generates lots of emotional responses. 20 years ago, or even last week, if I have a red pen and I walk around the classroom and I tackle 3 or 4 children's books at a time, I am live marking in the room rather than taking those pieces of work home. Using the technology that I've showed you, or the technique with a visualizer, is another way of live marking to engage all the class, reduce transitions, and allow you to access kids in a different way. Point number 6, modelling. So I do, we do, you do. I showed this to you in the live marking idea. If you're modelling in the classroom, not every lesson, but if you're modelling various techniques and strategies, or if you want students to write a paragraph about Macbeth, if you do it first and then you get to do it together and then they do it on their own, there's a higher chance that they'll be more secure at attempting a challenging piece of work. Number 7, feedback. It's a continuous loop. In our examination system, we have to get kids to a point where they will receive a grade. But let me just ask you a question from Todd Rose, who wrote a fabulous book called The End of Average. How old were you when you passed your driving test? You might have been 18, you might have been 33, or you might have been 17 years old. The point is, it doesn't matter how old you are. The point is that you got that feedback and you passed the test. And here lies the challenge for teachers. We have to get students to a certain point at a particular time when they're 16 years old to pass an exam. And this is a larger issue for us to all tackle at a national level, is how we can change student grades to a system where they accumulate knowledge and skills to have a repertoire of qualifications so that they can go off into the wider world. That's another issue, not for this video, but something to consider.